the best lifts that transfer to this stupid strength? Is that the dead squat? Are there variations of the squat that you've noticed that have carried over as you've gotten better?
In Strongman, there are 6 fundamental movement patterns expected of us: push, pull, squat, hinge, overhead press, and carry. And so those 6 are what you have to train, but there's a lot of overlap.
When you read a paper, how do you think about applying that?
If you're talking about anyone who's an elite performing athlete, one of the problems with research is,
looking at Big Z, do you look at him and think like, I need to keep getting bigger?
but let's say the question is, what stops me from winning 5 World's Strongest Man titles? Other than the obvious, it's very hard.
We're going to get knowledge bombs from the world's strongest man, Mitchell Hooper, and we're going to start right now. So we are privileged enough to sit down with the world's strongest man, Mitchell Hooper. Mitchell has won the world's strongest man. He's medaled multiple years in a row on the world's strongest man podium. He's won the Arnold. He's won the Shaw Classic. He's won every single major in the world's strongest man circuit. He is indeed the world's strongest man, an absolute freak. And on top of that, he has a massive amount of knowledge. We get into his training splits, exercises that he likes to use that transfer to his other big movements. He breaks down how he would train for the Arnold, a shorter show, versus how he trains for a longer show. And he goes into every single aspect and even how athletes can use strongman training. So this thing is absolutely stacked with information. Sit down, get your notebook ready. You got some knowledge that you got to learn. All right, Mitchell, being the world's strongest man, okay, I want to know right away, what would a training split look like, a day-to-day breakdown of let's say a week as you're heading into maybe the Arnold or even into the world's strongest man competition? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, in Strongman, we always have different events. So it really depends on what you're going into. But generally speaking, there'll be some sort of deadlift event, moving event, overhead press event, some sort of pull event, and probably a grip event. And so when we get that set of events, one day will be dedicated to more work capacity directly related to what's going to be expected of you in the show. One separate day will be dedicated to your heaviest lift. So whatever the max is of that show, that's probably a deadlift. You have another day more conditioning based, related to that moving event that you're going to do. Train grip a couple of times a week, train pressing a couple of times a week. And that really fills it out. One of the hard things in Strongman is that whole training block is going to be centered around what that show is, because with protecting the sympathetic nervous system, it's impossible to be able to do other things on top of prepping for a show. And we often have show after show after show. And so that's how I handle the 8 to 10 weeks into shows. After we get the events, World's Strongest Man is a total different ballgame, because we're not talking about 6 events. We're talking about 12 events. And so you sort of have to pick and choose. Are you a guy who's preparing for the finals, or are you a guy who's preparing for the heats to try to make the finals? And there has been cases where people have underprepared for heats and not even made the finals that they were training for. So it really is difficult. It's a less straightforward answer than I would think. But sympathetic wise, let's just talk off season. Let's say there was no competition at all. It'd be deadlift once a week, squat 1 to 2 times a week on top of that, pressing 3 times a week, and pulling twice a week. Strength is a skill, and skill requires frequency. So high frequency, relatively low volume, moderate high intensity to not burn out the nervous system.
Okay, that's freaking that's great. If you're looking at, I mean, you sort of just answered that, but I was going to say, if you're looking at like the best lifts that transfer to this stupid strength, right? Is that the dead, squat? Are there variations of the squat that you've noticed that have carried over as you've gotten better? And like just looking at your career, somebody who's popped on the scene in 22 and then winning immediately. Is there anything with those lifts that you changed, or is it just the timeline and the commitment to getting that volume in over that long period of time? I guess it's like 2 questions for you.
Yeah, no, that's right. So in Strongman, there are 6 fundamental movement patterns expected of us: push, pull, squat, hinge, overhead press, and carry. And so those 6 are what you have to train, but there's a lot of overlap. So say pressing is basically an explosive quarter squat and then kind of locking it out or catching it, or depending on your style. And so I've found something like a safety bar squat, any squat version that's going to keep you more upright than a traditional low bar heavy squat is going to translate over to your capacity to squat, of course, to deadlift, to push press. It's also going to contribute more to your athleticism because that upright position is going to replicate triple extension better. And so that's one of the things where I go, that's really, really important to be able to hold in there. And then deadlifting is deadlifting. I think too many people get too cute about it. If you're good at conventional deadlifts from the ground with a power bar, you're going to be good in every other style. So I think a simplified version of that. And then just little movement qualities, like the ability to extend your spine and get underweight is incredibly useful across a variety of events. And so the short answer is, how do you find these exercises that are going to translate over to several events instead of having to train them all individually? And those are a couple of ways in which I do that.
So I'm thinking about like carryover stuff. Like, how about this? How much weightlifting movements in the sense of like a clean or maybe a power snatch or a jerk? How frequently, if at all, are you doing those movements? And then do you see a carryover if you're doing them to a pull or to, in the sense of squat as well?
Yeah, so I'll do jerks when it comes to max overhead lifts. Cleans and power cleans, never. One of the problems with us as strongmen is we don't have the mobility to sit a bar really comfortably on our shoulders. And so I think the skill requirement is too high for us to take the time to learn it, to be able to get exposure from that. But with jerks, that's been really useful to just purely go, how can I exhibit the most power through the ground translated into a bar? Something like a quarter jerk is really, really nice to just get a huge weight on the shoulder. How can you pop that off with as much power? That's one of the things that contributed to me breaking the axle press world record is a split jerk, or my version of a split jerk. That's halfway there. But yeah, that power development is really important. And that's one of the challenges, that if we're training for maximal strength, which is inherently slow, and maximal power at the same time provides some obvious difficulty. And so that's one of the things in the off season where, from a power development standpoint, things like broad jumps and box jumps and, weight light enough on the shoulders that we're not necessarily jerking it, but we are using pure triple extension to launch that weight overhead. That's when that becomes more applicable in time that we can focus on it.
Okay. So you will use plyometrics, like how often, and let's say off season, like a broad jump, is that once a week, or what would that frequency look like?
Yeah, in a perfect world, I'd be doing it 2 to 3 times a week. The thing about plyometrics and being over 300 pounds is there's only so much of that beating that you can take, especially in your off season when you're trying to recover. So if I was giving advice or just general insight, rarely would I do any rebounding anything. If I were to do a broad jump, it would be one jump, gather, and go again. Okay. If it's a box jump, it's jump up, step down, and jump up again. Purely concentric focused.
Okay. That helps. Oh, that helps quite a bit. So it's like almost... Yes, looking at the show, what is the show based off of? And then you're taking the show, you're looking at, 6 events, or in the World's Strongest Man, 12 events. Then you're looking at conventional, typically a big time deadlift, a safety squat bar. Do you ever do front squats?
No, only because of mobility. I'll do safety squat bar front squats.
Okay.
But I don't find the cross position particularly comfortable. And my limiting factor almost always seems to be the ability to keep the bar on my shoulders rather than anything else. But if I had the mobility to do front squats, that would be an incredibly valuable tool. Say even a front half squat in our sport would be amazing.
Okay. So you're looking at, safety bar squat, possibly safety bar squat, front squats. I mean, some type of jerks for the max press, a little bit of broads and box jumps. And then this is another big question from an accessory point of view, dumbbell work. Are you doing like dumbbell military presses, dumbbell inclines? Like how much work are you going to be doing to sort of support those shoulders? And is there any bodybuilding work factored in? How do you lay that out then as a supporting role for that max strength?
Yeah, so purely off-season stuff with dumbbells and with bodybuilding work. And that's the season I'm in right now. And honestly, I love it. I love that style of training. You try harder and you get more, which doesn't always happen in the strength world. The problem with dumbbells and being very strong is whilst it is a safer movement because it's less than half the load that you would use with a barbell, getting it into position almost creates this inherent lack of safety. And so for me to do a set of 8 on incline dumbbell press, we're talking 160, 70, 80 pounds, depending on how strong I am, maybe 190s. And you're swinging those up with your arms, or you're trying to get people to hand them to you. And logistically, it gets really difficult. And so that's the only reason that I wouldn't use them on a regular basis. But off-season bodybuilding absolutely plays a role.
Our podcast is sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. Peak Strength is an app that you guys can download. It's the first link in the description. It's the pinned comment where you can train like a specific athlete. So if you're a football player, a power lifter, you want to increase your deadlift, make sure that you go into Peak Strength after you download it and you select it. You want to train as a power lifter to become as strong as you possibly can. Maybe you're even a coach and you want to get back in shape. You're sick of thinking about how athletic you were back in high school. You can select our athletic fitness program. You can go into that athletic fitness program and select specific goals like increasing muscle mass, increasing your coordination, becoming better with your endurance and your cardio. So all you have to do is click the first link in the description, click that pinned comment, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store, get in there, download it, and then make sure that you start and register that first workout to get on those gains. Now, let's get back to learning from Mitchell Hooper. Okay, when we're talking about like the lifts that transfer to that stupid strength, one thing I watching you and watching your career, watching your YouTube channel, seeing what you've done with other athletes also, and then I'm a track coach, throws coach, so I've come from the realm of Olympic weightlifting, from throwing, discus throwing, shot putting, so I have a connection to that world, and seeing athletes like Joe Kovacs. Okay, you did a video with Joe Kovacs. He's, I would say, probably one of the strongest human beings on the planet. Are there specific sports that you notice that transfer well to the realm of strongman, where you're like you came from a background where you were running marathons, which I did want to ask you how many marathons you've run, but you have a very, very unique background. Are there other sports where it's like, okay, this sport has a greater representation in the strongman community?
Yeah, football is far and away. Offensive linemen seem to do really well. We've got 2 in the top 10 in the world right now who were either in the NFL or on practice squads or in training camps. One for the Packers, one for the Cowboys. But honestly, if you take my background, running marathons to World's Strongest Man, that's sort of like it's like the clickiest thing. It's like the most clickbait. But before marathons, I did bodybuilding. Before bodybuilding, I played football in college. Before that, I played at a high rep level. I played basketball and rugby and swimming, and you name it, I played it. And so it's more a statement of general kinesthetic awareness than it is that this sport is good for strongman.
On that note, what would be, this is one of our viewers submitted a question. They're like, what's harder, running a marathon or being involved in one singular event for the world's strongest man? That was a little side thing there. Like what involves more suffering maybe?
Yeah, marathon for sure. Like hours and hours and hours of suffering. Like, there's no question. Also, when you're not built to do it, it's also way more difficult. There are some strongman events though that you're like, why are we doing this? So if you've ever seen the Dinny Stones, where it's little rings attached to rocks and we walk with them, like, you got to hook grip that, and you're hook gripping like a very tiny ring. So it's basically like thumb pain tolerance that you're relying on. And so there are some things in strongman where I'd just rather do without, but I would choose anything in strongman over going and running a marathon.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Okay. When you're looking at nutritionally, like you put out, I think probably some of the best content regarding nutrition, especially just general, like for anyone to really consume. What do you think, or what in a snapshot could somebody take from, like, look, I need to gain weight. I need to get stronger. I need to get more explosive. How can we do this as effectively as possible without getting, without having this super fat, dirty bulk? Is there anything, or specifically, how do you break down so that you can gain weight effectively and not be a fat slob is the question.
Yeah. There's a psychological and a physiological conversation to be had about this. The physiological conversation that people who struggle to gain weight for some reason refuse to accept is like the scale is that is your measure. That's your singular measure. Your singular measure is not calories in, calories out, as some people think, because you can't measure your calories out in a exact way. You don't exist in a chamber all day for anyone to measure that. And so you just have to eat what you eat, look at the scale, and accept that if you eat more than you put out, then the scale is going to go up and vice versa. That's the physiological, simple, no nonsense conversation to be had there. And a lot of influencers stop the conversation there. And I think these people just have a lack of experience dealing with actual people in front of them, because then we get to the psychological conversation of like, I feel full. And the worst feeling in the world is feeling full and needing to eat more. Nobody is going to do that and eat a huge amount of calories after. And so there are little things that you can do, like the more you blend your food and the less you chew, the less satiated you feel. There are mechanisms that actually trigger that feeling. And so you can actually manipulate the amount you chew your food, and that's going to contribute to your weight gain or weight loss. And so I would say if you start and finish the day with a shake, in that shake, you got a couple of scoops of whey protein. You've got milk if you can tolerate it. Personally, 2% for me is what I would choose to do. Throw a little bit of honey in there. Throw a little bit of peanut butter in there. That would be really useful. Another interesting tip that some people don't appreciate is that the glycemic index of food it doesn't matter what it is individually if you have multiple foods at the same time. And so let's say you need another 50 grams or 75 grams of carbs for the day. There's no problem putting that in a shake with milk and whey protein in there. You're not going to have this huge glycemic load immediately because the other ingredients in there are going to slow down the digestion. And so little things like that are very useful. You can get 75 grams of honey in, literally feel no more full, enjoy the shake more, not try to hammer down more oats, and you're good to go. So it's little things like that for sure that can play a big role. And then taste is a massive factor. You need to eat foods that you enjoy eating. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. You will not get fat or gain weight on pure chicken and rice. It's not going to happen. No bodybuilder even does that. And so, 80-20. And then in terms of food and just like, again, structuring it in someone's day to actually make it make sense. Number one thing is how can you have access to high quality protein always is important. So whether that's a backup at Chipotle, whether that's leftovers from dinner, anything, number one is just how do I get my protein that I need in throughout the day? Then we go, how do I have good sources of fats? Because that's the next problem you're going to run into is just dog shit food that's fried and fatty and whatever. If you can avoid terrible fats, which to me, just trans fats shouldn't exist in the diet of anyone who's trying to perform at a high level. Dairy fat, dairy saturated fat, meat saturated fat, I think is fine personally. So that conversation, and then carbs is actually like, you can find carbs absolutely anywhere. So like, let's not worry about it. And so long as you eat those carbs, even if they're crappy with your high protein source, you're going to get away with it to a reasonable extent. And you got to have these backup plans, but that's really the hierarchy that I would use to try to have a reasonable approach to gaining weight.
How frequently for you personally, how many meals in a day would you be eating and are you training twice a day when you're in prep for a big time comp?
No, I'll train once a day, 5 times a week, prep for a big comp. As you move heavier and heavier loads, of course, you need a more sympathetic rest. And so maybe there'll be a bit of a recovery session mobility, but nothing actually exertive. And I eat 5 to 6 times a day. My calories are 5,000 to 5,500, depending on what time of year we're in, depending on, honestly, just some like logistical things. Am I busy? Am I with my daughter? Am I working a lot that day? I don't get too hung up on it because, again, I'll just look at the scale, say I gained 5 pounds or I lost 5 pounds that I didn't want to. I just need to intentionally eat a bit more. And so in that, for those 5 or 6 meals, I just have habitual meals that I know are going to give me the macros for that meal. And so I have these preset choices of things that I already know are going to get the job done for me, that I enjoy eating, that I can rotate around. And these are just my simple options. And like, okay, I'll go to one of those. And honestly, it just turns out to be like all of this stuff that's very easy for me, very readily available, very convenient. And that consistency is not hard for me.
Are you saying, okay, so I agree with everything you're saying. Do you have a preset number for amount of protein that you want to get I'm trying to think through if I did the math quickly off of 5,500 calories. If you were getting, let's say, 400 grams of protein in a day, that's my assumption. I'm not positive that would be where you're at, but how are you splitting that up? Are you favoring that more towards when you would be training, or is it something that you sort of even out throughout the entire day with protein?
To me, if you're in no. To me, if you're in a surplus, you don't need to be too worried about the timing of nutrients. I think the only time you really need to be concerned is if you're restricting carbohydrates while trying to lose weight, and then you should bulk those just before, just after your workout, of course. But when you're eating in surplus all day, it's really, according to the research, not going to make a huge amount of difference, and probably one of those things that if you stress about is going to have your adherence to your diet drop. And research shows that if you start dropping off some of the commitments you make to yourself when it comes to diet, you're going to start dropping off more commitments to yourself. It's almost like you've broken the ice. And so, I'll have 300 to 330 grams of protein a day. Reason being, the more carbs I can eat, the more fuel I potentially have, and hopefully it doesn't get turned into fat. And carbs are also protein sparing. They're nitrogen sparing. So there's no need for me to eat in excess of protein. It's also harder to do. It's more satiating. It's harder to find good sources and keep them around. And so that's where I stick. I'll stick around 300 to 330 grams of protein, just under a kilo of carbohydrates, somewhere between 800 and 900. And the rest is made up with fat. And everyone, if you actually track your food, everyone would have the problem of how do I keep my fat down? And I'll get up to 150, 200 grams of fat a day. In a perfect world, it would be 100 or less of fish oils and omega-3s and whatnot. But it's hard to find that good food on a regular basis.
Do you have, so this is another question brought up, is like an off-season pre-workout meal that's like a consistent go-to versus an in-season, like you're prepping for one of the big shows, pre-workout meal? Or is it going to be that pre-workout meal something that is similar? And then, okay, so that's two questions, but then also that pre-comp meal, that's another big question that we get, because we've got we've trained Olympians and athletes here where it's like, what is, some of the shot putters were like, what does he eat before he competes? And then even during the time. So
yeah, no, for sure. For sure. So one thing about strongman shows is our first event might be at 1 PM. Our next event is going to be at like 4 PM. Our next one might be at 7. And so you can't really have like, this is my one meal I'm having before I exert myself, because it's not going to shake out that way. On a day-to-day basis, perfect day, I would have Monster Mash before my workout, about 90 minutes before. That's rice, ground beef, chicken or beef broth, and some peppers, a little bit of vegetables in there. This, just back to the conversation of how do you gain weight, you put chicken or beef broth in there, you now have to chew it less, you feel less full, good to go. And so that's what I would have before my workout. But honestly, that's not necessarily thinking like this is the best fuel for my workout. It's like, if I just purely chose what's the best fuel for my workout, we drop the fat right off, drop the protein considerably, and just focus on carbs. But if I had one meal where I dropped off protein and fats a little bit, it would put such a load on the rest of the day to get that protein in that it wouldn't be feasible. Now, this changes during contests. During contests, we have implements resting on our stomachs. Say the bottom position for a large man in a clean, or in the bottom position of a clean pull or a snatch when you got to get a little bit lower. Now we have to think about these things like, is the log on my stomach going to make me want to puke? And I can't have too much in there. So I go complex carbohydrates purely, tons of rice cakes, tons of crackers, all stuff that's going to last me a long time and sit in my stomach pretty light. Biggest mistake I see people make in performance sports is relying purely on simple carbohydrates and assuming as though that's going to get them through, when you're going to have these peaks and valleys. Same thing with caffeine. If you have one training session or one event, that's great. But I've watched some Olympic weightlifting enough to know that the single peak from caffeine is not going to carry you through all 6 attempts that you have. So relying on caffeine or simple sugars, bad idea. Maybe a good idea for later events, but not as good for kicking things off in my case.
No, and even to echo that, you'll often see where somebody who does crush too much, let's say too much caffeine early, dies off on their fifth or sixth lift, or they start to get dehydrated because they've pissed so much that now, they're blacking out from that heavy clean or whatever, and they have no energy because the spike from the caffeine and from them eating too many Skittles in between snatch and clean and jerk.
Yeah, and you really don't. You can't really comfortably peak those things twice. Even if you bring blood sugar up, you still feel strange afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and I guess with the monster mash, or even if you're going into a training session, are you looking at this like the same, where you're sitting there with the complex carbohydrates, because you might be doing some of the same exact stuff in a training session that you would be hitting in a comp? So is that essentially the same thing there with that pre-workout meal would be, an hour and a half out, you're going to have some rice cakes with, I don't know, a banana or something, or oats or something along those lines with some protein? Is that how that would be laid out?
So in training, I'll always have Monster Mash an hour and a half before, just because that's how my day works out. In contests, I'll have some sort of full meal an hour and a half before. But those complex carb, that focus is always from the first event onwards. I won't have protein, I won't have fats, I won't have anything other than those, and I'll just hammer them down as much as I can to try to stay satiated without boosting my blood sugar in a big way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But look, when I have a normal training session, right, I can use sugar and caffeine like a normal person, because my normal workouts are 2.5 hours. I can't afford for one extended peak and just knock it out. And then if I burn out doing some bullshit tricep extensions after my log presses are done. You're like, okay, well, I made a mistake, but it's a very small one.
Right. It's not as detrimental to the performance overall.
Of course.
You brought up the research around nutrition, research around training to a point. I wanted to ask you specifically, what do you see as like the downfalls and the upsides of like research-based training regarding YouTube and application? And honestly, something you said echoed with me, where you were like, look, a lot of these people who might stop at the psychological or the physiological aspect of weight gain, they just stop early because they're not actually exposed to training individuals. And that did trigger a little bit with me, where I'm like, that's sort of how I feel to a point with the research-based stuff. Not that it's bad to be research-based, but I wanted to see your take as far as like the content that comes out there, but then also how you use that regarding, you've gone into this pretty eloquently, I'd say, with regards to nutrition. What about, what do you think about, or when you read a paper, how do you think about applying that, so maybe some criticism, but then also some application?
You certainly have to take everything with a grain of salt. The first thing you have to look at is who fits the inclusion criteria. And is this anywhere close to the people that we're talking about? And your answer, I'll give it to you already. It's no. If you're talking about anyone who's an elite performing athlete, one of the problems with research is naturally research has to get funded. And how much funding is there for elite athletes being better than they were before? Like very little, because who cares about that? Just like sports fans. And you don't have like billionaire sports fans who want to pay universities to test athletes. It's oftentimes some sort of clinical population, or that's their goal, is to tie it back to clinical population. So they'll take untrained males from 20 to 24, or moderately trained males, or even when they say trained, you're talking people who have gone to the gym before. And if you've gone through these inclusion-exclusion criterias, you're like, trained male, you're still excluded if you train too hard, or if you've trained too often or too long. So it's like recreationally trained. So there is one problem. You then have who paid for the study and why did this study get done in the first place? Now we have an inherent bias there. Okay. Then we have this statistical analysis where when you see the dot points of individual results, even though we have one outcome that we can say it's statistically significant that X protocol resulted in X outcome, you still see these dots all over the place. So like once you have a person in front of you, you still got to go like, look, this is the general advice, but it still could be wrong for you individually, because there are people who lost strength on this protocol versus this protocol. So we have to accept that. And the last thing we got to accept is statistical significance versus practical significance. And yes, if you test enough people and it makes enough people on average 0.01% stronger, if you test 1 million people and that's the outcome, it's statistically significant and you have every right to report that. But does anyone care about being 0.01% stronger adopting this new protocol. No, you're not going to set a new world record doing this thing. And then you got to merge this with like, is this something that would fit into someone else's life in the whole picture? And when it comes to an athlete, you always have too many variables going on to even be able to assess one individual thing results in one individual outcome. And so when I look at research and I go, how could this possibly apply? You look and you say, okay, is there a physiological basis of what they're saying? If you can easily understand that, then it's an exciting grain of salt that you might be able to use. You might be able to take advantage of and experiment and see how that works. But that's really it. Now, the problem is that's really it when it comes down to talking about an individual. And I would say in terms of evidence-based, it's a great place to have a conversation when you're advising a population, like I might say on a YouTube video. But when it comes to an individual, you have to be much more open to other things. And I've come across it a number of times where I've given someone individual advice and they've said, oh, well, you said this on a YouTube video. And you go, yes, because when I talk to general advice and general people, it's a different story than who is this individual in front of me. And of course, we get into more YouTube drama stuff of like it's an excuse to not train hard. And it's a this and it's an end all be all and you must choose one or the other. But honestly, I think if you really critically analyze the evidence, the people in the evidence-based world and the people in the school of hard knocks world agree on a lot more than they would like to admit. Like the evidence does not say you shouldn't train hard. It says you should train very hard. And you're like, I think sometimes it's more social media that drums us up and people trying to get clicks and views than anything. But yeah, look, that's my take on it. And it is more nuanced than just here's the research and this is correct.
What's up, guys? Our podcast and our channel are sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. The entire focus of Peak Strength is to provide you guys with the absolute best sports performance app that you could ever imagine. We build out the programs on the back end. We take in all of these different decisions that we learned here on site at Garage Strength so that we can then apply it to you so you can improve your training. So if you guys want to improve your overall sports performance, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Download Peak Strength. You'll get a free week of training, and then you can start getting on those gains, get those reps done so that you can become a champion. Now, let's get back to the video. Peace. For yourself personally, like, do you ever read a paper and go through the paper and think like, okay, how can I apply this? Let's say take nutrition out the window, because I think that, I don't know, internally I feel like that's a little bit more reasonable. Where you might read, okay, I want to throw an example. Like you read like a squat every day program, right? And you're like, well, my squat sucks compared to my deadlift, and I'm just throwing this against the wall. Would you take that and roll with it and be like, well, what if I tried to squat every day for 40 days? You know, do you ever do anything like that?
If I wasn't a professional athlete,
video.
If I wasn't a professional athlete, I'd probably be more apt to just give things a try. But when it's real life and my family's stability on the line and stuff, no, I don't read papers and think, how can I apply this to me? Because I don't fit any inclusion criteria to anything. I'm a sample one of one, as is every athlete in the top 50 of the world. And my coach does not read papers and think, how does that apply to me? Because at a certain point, you're better off looking at everything you know based on everything you've seen and all the people you've seen and say, well, that's probably the best evidence to rely on, and let's stick with that and rock. I think research when it comes to elite high performers should be taken very, very lightly. In the same breath, though, I'm way more willing to experiment with things that I've heard, seen, whatever on myself than I would be to recommend it to anyone else. I try tons of stuff that I never talk about because it has no evidence, but maybe I do it and it feels good for me, and that's that. But yeah, it's no. Short answer, no.
So, okay, this sort of leads into, we talked about shot putters, other athletes in other realms, and whether that transfers to strongman. And I wanted to bring up with Joe Kovacs being like somebody in my mind, probably a top 5 strongest man in the world, like not world's strongest man, but as far as like just stupid, absolute strength, he's up there. would you not be more inclined then? In this case, it's like, why are we taking, and for your example, it's like you'll listen more to Joe than you would listen to someone, a research paper, I'm assuming, in that
Yeah,
regard.
of course. No doubt.
And I guess that brings up the question I wanted to pose to you is, how stupid strong is Joe Kovacs?
Yeah, like off the charts. I mean, he's got a video of him squatting, I believe it's 900 for 4 in sleeves in some commercial gym. And when you're in the strength world, sometimes it's the thing someone does, and sometimes it's how they do it that's most impressive. And I'm not even talking about the ease of which it's done, because there are lots of dudes who can squat 900 for 4. Well, not lots, but a few. And I don't look at many of them and say that dude has potential to be the world's strongest man. But Joe walks 900 out like an ordinary person would walk one plate out. Like, you can just tell that doesn't look like it feels heavy on his back, for example. Yeah. Or like when he's got 600 locked out in a bench press, you're like, a lot of people would be having like some stability things going on, a little bit of shaking. He can just his body can just handle it. And you can tell that he can just handle it. So when I think, how does that translate over to something like a log, a stone, a yoke? I'm like, I don't really see any holes in that dude's body. On top of the obvious elephant in the room, he's under WADA protocols. And what he could do if he wasn't, that's absolutely off the charts. So I would say he is the number one freakiest strength person I've ever seen in my life. And it would be amazing to see what he could do in strongman. The only reason he wouldn't win is because he's got, to his admission, I've never tested it, but he says he has a bad grip because he has super fat hands, which makes a lot of sense. So that would be maybe the only thing. Otherwise, he is an absolute freak.
Also, Joe saying he has a bad grip might not mean much. Like, it's his bad grip compared to his back squat or his deadlift, or or his pad bench with 700 pounds for a double. It's like one of those things. Like, okay, what is bad?
That's a good point.
Okay, if you're looking at, you look at maybe throwers or anything like that, but even other sports, football. You mentioned football. Where do you see strongman training in the sense of like actual tests that you're doing in a strongman competition? Where do you see that training leak over into the realm of sports performance? Like, if you came and you're looking at some of our wrestlers or some of our football guys, you're like, would you look at specifically some type of strongman exercise that you're like, yo, this could help you in your performance? Does that exist? What are they? What's your take on like applied strongman training?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an incredibly underused tool. Funny enough, I actually connected with Lane Johnson, Eagles O-lineman, best O-lineman in the world, who does strongman training in his offseason. And I think one of the biggest mistakes in strength and conditioning is trying to make the gym work look like your sport and a heavy version of your sport. And that's a big mistake to me, because your sport will make you better at your sport and the gym will make you strong. The happy medium is, will squatting more make you a better wrestler or football player? Yes, it will. Will it make you a better wrestler or football player relative to a big front squat while you're squeezing a stone and walking with it? No, because that is making you stronger in a controlled, regulated way where you can exert a lot of force, a lot of strength, and something that crosses over more. So I would say using things like sandbags and Atlas stones, absolutely. Sandbags to shoulder, very heavy for sure. Because strongman gives you this ability to express huge amounts of strength in awkward ways. And right now in strength and conditioning, the two things I see is we're either doing very heavy barbell lifts or very powerful barbell lifts that are applicable to the skill of a barbell, or we see incredibly powerful exercises with 5-pound med balls. And you're like, if you're a fucking O-lineman using a 5-pound med ball, I don't care how hard you throw it, you're not doing anything with the 300-pound guy in front of you. And so it's a really nice merge of those two worlds. And so I absolutely think strongman training would be useful on top of and I suppose this gets back to some of the applicable research that does translate over. Number one exercise when it comes to intramuscular studies for your core is deadlifts. Number two is squats. Now, in this study, they didn't test Atlas stones or yokes or single-sided farmer's carries or anything like that. So if you're going core strength stiffness and your ability to translate force from your legs through to your upper body, I don't see anything as potent as strongman.
And that's where you would just say some form of carries, sandbag carries, stone carries, lifts, sandbag lifts, shouldering it. I'm just trying to go through my notes here.
Yeah, just simply put, using standardized awkward objects in ways that you can apply principles of progressive overload to over time. It makes so much sense to me.
Okay, before we get off, I got two questions. One it was actually a realistic question because we get this a lot. Is take me through how you would approach, let's say, your breath on like a big time deadlift or a big time squat versus how you're controlling your breathing when you're doing some, like, let's say, a consistent circuit almost that you might have at the World's Strongest Man where you have to run more and control your breathing. How do you handle those things as a strength-based athlete? Because I think the breathing aspect for bigger athletes, I think football players could benefit from this as far as how to control your breathing, how to approach the bar in the gym through the full rep, but then also how you transfer that in a competitive situation.
Yeah, no, that's great. When it comes to a max lift, you'll notice that I'll do big, large, intentional breaths, a good number of them before I approach the implements. That's because big, large, intentional breaths have a sympathetic response and will make you more powerful to some small degree. And so that's my approach for a max lift. And then, of course, biggest breath in possible, drive that diaphragm down, put that all into your stomach and brace into your belt. So that's for a one-off lift. When we're doing medleys or any sort of consistent effort, the most important thing to recognize for me is that respiration is driven by the buildup of CO2, not by trying to get oxygen in. And so you can reduce the amount of CO2 through hyperventilation. And so in the event itself, I am focusing on hyperventilating when I don't have an implement, because when I have an implement, it is always sat on my stomach and my diaphragm, so I can't really breathe as much. And so that allows for a little bit of a buffer there. Outside of contests, I'll also train to be able to tolerate CO2 better, which is a trainable quality. Doing things like empty breath holds where I let all the air out of my lungs, hold my breath for as long as possible. The CO2 concentration gets very, very high very quickly, and you get used to that discomfort. And the less you can panic under that discomfort, the better off you are. And this is evidenced by, like, when you do something where you can't breathe as you wish, and then you stop and you start breathing as you want to, in the first second, you feel better. You feel no panic and you feel all good. Not because your actual blood values have gotten to where they need to get, but just because your feelings of dyspnea or breathlessness are gone. And so eliminating that feeling is really useful.
You ever do, this is a side question around the buildup of CO2 and exhaling and the hyperventilation. I don't know. I spent a long time digging deep into the Wim Hof stuff, a lot of this, and a lot of deeper stuff outside of Wim Hof, but even doing these, dude, I got obsessed with doing tests where I would try and see how many push-ups or sit-ups I could do with my breath out of me. And I wanted to see if that was ever anything that you would roll with.
Oh man, I see the use in it for sure. But I get panicked enough just sitting, relaxing without breath in my lungs. I'll tell you though, at 3:30, it wouldn't be much of anything before I'm gasping.
7 push-ups later, I'm good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I got one question out of just from like an old head is what separates you from becoming the next Mariusz Pudzianowski?
Well, look.
Also, I think Mariusz might have gotten caught with cocaine or something. Let's throw that out the window.
Yeah. It's a much more competitive era right now than back then. He also benefited from the IFSA split, where a lot of the best guys in the world he actually wasn't competing against.
Okay.
So in our world, Zydrunas Savickas is undoubtedly the greatest of all time, even though Mariusz has won more World's Strongest Man titles. But let's say the question is, what stops me from winning 5 World's Strongest Man titles? Other than the obvious, it's very hard. You have to push yourself way harder now than when he did. You got to push yourself and your health closer to the brink to be able to perform at these high levels. Mariusz's max deadlift would be 30% lower than mine. And your body just systemically, you might be able to train your muscles and your tendons and your ligaments to tolerate a lot. But in the end, a human body is still a human body, and eventually it's going to break down. And so I would say the longevity of staying injury free would be the biggest thing to stop me.
Okay. And do you ever see, like, looking at Big Z, do you look at him and think like, I need to keep getting bigger? Is that something that you do think through and that you're trying? Or is it like, dude, he's just huge, like he was huge, and I don't want to push my health that far with having children, you know?
Sure. No, I don't think I need to get bigger. In fact, I think right now, if you put the best strongman of all time in a contest and all of us were in our prime, I think I would come out on top. And to me, that means that I'm on the right track. There's not much more I need to do, because as you gain weight, you get less athletic and you're going to get fatter hands. So your grip will suffer a little bit and you won't be able to run for medleys and you won't be as good for reps. And so that's where World's Strongest Man is not really the right title, because the title is really World's Best Strongman, and gaining weight would make me stronger, but probably a worse strongman overall.
Perfect. That's a great thing to end on there. Mitchell, thanks for coming on the podcast. Give us a plug quick for your YouTube channel and where everybody can find you. I'm sure everybody already knows.
Yeah, no, all good. If you just search up Mitchell Hooper anywhere, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, extremely active across all of those. So yeah, you can find me, educational stuff, stupid stuff, a little bit of me.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Mitchell. Peace.
Thanks, brother.